get that? We are taping, right? She said that.
Is there a
We
taser
should-
there?
we should
Which
get
one?
away.
You reacted to the same
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, yeah.
I don't have to get. I don't often get told I'm the boss. Let's just go with that.
Is it on? Okay.
It's too far.
Probably should.
Oh, no.
All right. Let's open this thing up. You want to dispense with the pledge?
You can, if you like.
Let's dispense with the pledge and open this show right up. I'd like to open this special workshop for the school budget presentation and turn this show over to Mr. Green.
All right, thank you very much. I handed out a couple of documents. You should have received, and I'll be talking about them in a second. The budget summary report is the main. It's, I think, 51 pages long. It's dated February 6, 2017. That's one document. You should have a copy of the cost center report, and then also the subsidy comparison report, and those are back-to-back copies in your file, and I have copies out here for members of the audience. I do have a short presentation to add along with this, and I gave you copies of the presentation in note format, so you can take notes and ask questions, and then you have the slides, and I'll make sure this is put in PDF form and available to the public online. The Lisbon School Department mission and vision drive our professional conversations, and that's what I wanted to start with, and the conversations and the work that we do. Our vision recognizes that all students learn in different ways and in different time frames, and our mission states that we are united with our community to provide a personalized, innovative education for all learners in an ever-changing world. This tentative 2017-18 school budget figures are preliminary, and there are several variables that will impact these numbers prior to the final budget approval on May 8, 2017. There are three important documents that I started with that I'll be referencing throughout my presentation tonight. And as we move forward with the budget process, it's important to notice the dates on each of these documents, as changes will be made as we proceed. The budget summary report that I mentioned, and we do have some copies here, but we traditionally only print one of these starting in February once we have an initial budget, because it's 50-something pages long. But that is dated February 6, 2017, and if you look at this particular document, you'll see that outside of salaries and benefits, there's only a few, there are some numbers that have changed, and the actual bottom line has changed, and that's a result of a software issue where when we were exiting staff, they weren't being exited correctly out of this particular form because we couldn't figure out why it was coming in at 1.1, I think it says 1.1 million, when everything was at zeros, but it was because any staff that had resigned or retired, when we took them out of the system by name, and it didn't delete it from this particular piece. So there was over 500,000 or 600,000, I think, that was a difference. So that's made a significant difference. But we don't print this out. We can, I guess, we can if you wanted a new copy. But the only difference you're probably going to notice is the bottom line. So the most important sheets that historically people are concerned about is the cost center report, which I gave you a copy, and that compares last year's budget, what was approved, to this year's proposed budget, and then the increases, and that's dated March 16th, 2017, and the subsidy comparison report, which is the one that most people, that's the primary one I use throughout the budget season, and that basically determines, a lot of times we'll show you what the local impact will be to taxes. The budget goals, the school committee budget goals, priorities or focus are to maintain all existing programs, including or reducing class sizes if applicable, remain focused on our mission and vision, and reestablish a positive working relationship with all vested stakeholders within the Lisbon School Department and community. Prioritize program and facility improvements, and that is linked to the NEASC accreditation. As you know, we just completed that, and the high school was fully accredited. Maintain our existing 5-year capital plan, consider technology improvements, and maintain professional development time for staff. As you will see on the March 13, 2017 Cost Center report, the tentative 2017-18 school budget currently has a $648,193 increase in local funding. That includes both the school department and adult education. And you'll look closely, a lot of the numbers I used, some of the numbers that I used in here, I focused on the school. As adult education is something we want to talk about or want to share with you, or at least give you an update on what that looks like. And I'll try to reference or remember where those numbers are, because historically, the school department, there's always been a challenge or a question of adding adult education to our budget when it's separate and it gets confusing. I know that there's always times that we focus on the school department. I say for instance, $115,000 in subsidy was reduced. That's on the school department side, whereas we anticipate, we don't know actuals, but there was $30,000 on the adult education side. So I'll try to, for you and the public, I'll try to make sure I differentiate between the two. But historically, that's been an issue. This preliminary budget maintains all of our current programs and services. The three largest impact areas that have influenced this budget has been the loss of state subsidy revenue, anticipated revenue, and the actual operational cost for the Gartley Street School. And for those on the council, the Gartley Street School is the day treatment program that we started last year. It happened at the very end, or right towards the end of our actual budget process. And as I mentioned to you before, and you'll see in that in the report, in the budget summary report, that what was budgeted for it and what was actually spent are significantly different. And that really is driving the cost of our current budget. But as I shared to the school committee, we have an increasing number of students who are requiring out-of-district or specialized services because of their needs. And when you look at what the cost is, or what we were paying or what we would pay to send these students out of district, although it looks significant, the potential for the savings are there now, but the potential for long-term savings are there as well. So even though it looks like a lot of money, or it is a lot of money, one thing to remember for you in the community and the school committee as well, what I've told them is you're either going to pay it keeping that program running, or we're going to be forced to pay it to have kids serviced outside. And when you start adding in transportation and everything, and the fact that we actually have a program that's close to our school, that kids are only in a van for 15 minutes, 20 minutes a day, or even half hour maybe. I don't think anybody rides that long. But instead of being traveled clear to Raymond or Portland or wherever, the potential is there. Now we did as I'll mention later, we did underestimate what the revenues would be, but we're actually getting better, and we currently don't have any students. We had one student that was out of district that was tuitioned in. If we were to have I think what I mentioned to the school committee is if we were to have 3 or 4 students from out of district be tuitioned in, this conversation is much different, because you're talking, we're the lowest priced, one of the lowest priced facilities around, and that's at $250 a day per student. So you start generating that kind of revenue, and the issue is that we have it staffed right now so that it does have a capacity we could increase the number of students there very easily without adding additional cost. So I want to point out that is really what's thrown off, and you'll see that's the biggest change in the actual budget itself. I believe it's it's over $600,000, I think, just for that one particular area. But it's something that we've talked about, and I'll stress that we're either going to pay it and do it ourselves, or you're going to pay more and have to do it on the outside and be required to do it, because that's special education costs are not declining, and it's really driving this particular budget. But I think we have a good program in place. We were fortunate to have the facilities. We were fortunate to have the people that can facilitate it, and we were able to hire people that can manage it. And from the first day that program started till now, the difference in the students is pretty amazing. They're very needy. They have a lot of needs, social needs and stuff that need to be addressed. But they seem to be having a lot of success, and I haven't received any parent complaints, or no families from that side for Gartley Street School have made any complaints or had any concerns. They've actually been quite impressed that their child is home early at night and not on the road. So I want to put that out there, that's something that we can talk about, cuts and changes, but you're going to pay for it one way or the other. And we're fortunate enough to have facilities, which a lot of other schools are trying to create these programs because of those costs, but they don't necessarily have the facilities. So there's a lot of schools that are now aware of our program, and they have kids that are traveling by, and I know we've been approached by a couple of districts. We just wanted to start as slow as we could, but the revenue piece and billing, and I talked to Diane about it's very complicated, and you can't make any mistakes. And we recently just hired somebody that would be down at that part of the building to handle that, and we're starting to see an increase in revenues. But when we built the budget last year, we anticipated a certain amount, and it was way overestimated. But again, we didn't have the program going. A lot of people say it takes about 3 years for something like that to get going before you see the results. As a result, the overall budget has an increase of 2.3%, or $352,746. As a result of the loss in subsidy revenue and other items, the current budget would actually require an increase in local funding of $648,193. But again, there are a lot of variables that I want to talk about this evening, and we know that number is going to be lower as we continue to move forward. And just to highlight on the for those people that are listening and for you, the budget summary report on pages 41 through 43 is where you'll find the Gartley Street School specifically. And so if you look on those particular pages, you will see what we actually budgeted and what we actually spent. And what we did is we didn't fill a number of positions. That's how we were able to cover the cost this year. And it's just a matter of, we did have, based on enrollment now, there were some costs. I want to say it was probably $300,000 or so of this total amount is probably attributed to the Gartley Street School. At the top of the March 13th, 2017 subsidy comparison sheet, the anticipated revenues currently utilized and developed in this budget include the use of the capital reserve, which we've done over the last several years, the interest credit from the guaranteed performance contract, bond proceeds, which I need to talk about because we've learned, as of today, we've learned that those are no longer available. They just need to be transferred out of the actual account. We based it on the numbers that came from the audit and what we knew had to be expended. But there's money that has to be transferred, and Lydia and Haley have been working on that all day. So that's this budget. At this point, there's $59,637 that we anticipated as revenue from the bonds that would not be included in this budget, unless something comes up. But I'm assuming, based on the last email I saw from Lydia, that is the case. The school nutrition program, and of course revenues from the Gartley Street School. Although we've included the use of funds from these revenue sources in the previous budget, there is a reduction in availability of these revenues. By now, it was $83,199, but now you have to add in the $59,637, which, to be honest, the proceeds from the project is something we knew were going to run out, and so it shouldn't be any shock to anyone that at this point those funds are no longer available. On February 16th, 2017, we received the preliminary ED 279 figures, and if you remember, the ED 279 is the document that we received from the state in regard to our funding, which indicated the preliminary numbers that came out indicated that our state subsidy for the school department, not including the adult education, but for the school department only, was going to be reduced by $115,592. I believe the reduction is directly related to elimination of the state's percentage of funding for the school administration and support. And that's been a complicated conversation because everybody's trying to figure out where they came up with the numbers. And so I've tried to figure out what I thought was the use, where they came up with the numbers is different than other school districts. And so I'm just assuming that that's the cause of the reduction. But I also wanted to point out, like I did to the school committee, is that the state has never paid 100% of any of our administrative costs. And so I'm guessing where it's $100-something thousand difference, I'm guessing it's probably roughly we received a little over, or I think I've mentioned around 180, 190 is what I guessed that we received. But again, that's complicated because they took it out of the budget, or took it off the ED 279, and the percentage, it's only, I think it's 65% of the actual number that's calculated in EPS that they pay, and then they only fund 50-something percent. So it's really complicated what that actual number is, but I believe that our reduction is directly related to that because our student enrollment went up. And most of our EPS numbers I'm going to share with you in here in a second, those numbers those numbers are at or below the formulas. As far as the budget components go over the next few months, what you've heard over the last couple of years for some of you is there's a lot of terms, and I'm trying to align them so that they match all the paperwork that we have. But the total budget and budget expenditures includes local funds, additional local funds, revenue, debt service, essential programs and services, which is referred to as EPS, the transition amount, and state subsidy. The total budget as of today for the Lisbon School Department, including adult education, is $15,678,286, and that's on the bottom of your subsidy comparison report. The unassigned fund balance, it used to be referred to as undesignated, but last year the auditors, there's new terms, so it's really the unassigned fund balance. This includes any unanticipated revenue, main care, tuition, etc. that we receive throughout the year, and money that is restricted and unassigned from the prior budget years. And we do have a balance in there, and that is something we'll talk about as a variable because there are options that we could draw that down even more because this year I think we can draw down at least another, we can draw down a certain amount up to a couple $100,000, I believe. But the issue is that if you do that, then the following year you have to match that unassigned funds. So you want to be real careful how much you build into your budgets because if one year you happen to have $400,000, that's great. You can lower budgets and maybe not impact taxes. But if the following year, if you don't have the $400,000 in there, then you're going to raise taxes or you're going to make cuts. So it's kind of a balance, and I've always tried to keep that unassigned or the use of the unassigned amount down into around the $100,000 range. But over the last couple of years, we've had to increase that as a result of different changes in the budget. Currently, we have $194,270, which is the same amount that we budgeted for that we used the year before. Anticipated revenue. This includes revenue from the use of the Capital Reserve Fund, the interest credit, the bond proceeds, the Gartley Street School revenue, and payments from the nutrition program. That's at the top of the subsidy comparison report. The local-only debt service. This includes the local payments for the track, the gym, and LCS, not included in the EPS and essential programs and services formula. One of the things we did do with our debt service, we do have debt service for our buses. We did purchase 3 buses this year, sorry. And one of the things we did, each year there's a reduction in the amount of interest that you pay on all of your debt. And so I have an amount for that. And what we did is we took that amount, used the reduction to pay for the bus, the new bus that wasn't budgeted, and then we added $10,000 to the technology fund. And then I think so you'll see that there's a $1,927 reduction in debt service, but that was a result of us using 30-something thousand to cover those other 2 items, which I'll talk about in a second. Essential programs and services. The EPS funding model is designed to ensure that schools have the programs and services which are essential if all students are to have equitable opportunities to achieve the main learning results. The 100% EPS number is the result of this calculation. The amount above 100% EPS is the result of subtracting the 100% EPS amount from the total budget. Now, looking at our ED 279, our preliminary ED 279, there's certain areas that they look at that they give you numbers for, and these have changed as a result of the proposed governor's budget. The teachers, the EPS formula says that we should have 76.1, and we actually have 74.2. In guidance, the EPS says we're supposed to have 4.1. We actually have 4. In librarians, the EPS says 1.5. We actually have 1. Health and nurses, EPS says we should have 1.5. We actually have 3. And the community has supported having a nurse in all the buildings, and we point that out every single year. Ed techs, EPS says we're supposed to have 7.7. We actually have 6.4. Now, this is one clarification is this is non-special ed techs. So these are like the ed techs that we use in kindergarten, the ones that we use in the buildings for other purposes. So it's not special ed, because some of you will say, well, there's more ed techs than that at LCS. That's correct, but this is non-special ed techs. Library techs, EPS says 2.5, and actually we have 1.6. And clerical, EPS says 6.3, we actually have 5.4. And school admin, EPS says 4.1, we have 5. Now, a couple of things you may ask, how do you come up with a 6.4 and 1.6? It comes down to how much of the school year they work, and the majority of our ed techs only work 8/10. So when you add all them up and they're multiplied by 8/10, that's where those numbers come in. Administration, you'll know it says 5, but actually we have 6. There's 2 of them that are half-time athletic directors or activities directors. So that's just so you know we're try to be clear that why our numbers are what they are when you start doing the math and thinking, well, I know there's 6 administrators. Why is he saying there's 5? It's because 2 of them are half-time activities directors, and those aren't counted under EPS. The transition amount. This is the amount of subsidy that we don't receive from the state because they're currently unable to fund the 55% that is required by law. That amount is $277,470. Total additional local funds. This is the amount above 100% EPS added to the transition amount. That amount is now $1,756,449. State subsidy, this is the actual amount of funding that we receive from the state. You'll see that the amount that we receive for the school is $8,477,994, which is a $115,592 decrease. And then the adult education, we received $45,471. We anticipate $15,000, which is a reduction of $30,471. But I'm going to talk about adult ed a little bit later. The required local contribution. This is the amount of money that you have to raise locally in order to receive the state subsidy. So every year, Lisbon has to raise $4,393,286 to receive the state subsidy that we receive. And then the rest, the additional funds, is what's raised locally. The total local funding, this is the amount of money that has to be raised locally through property taxes. That amount currently is $6,642,276. And that includes the 100% over EPS and the minimum, or the state, the local contribution. As I mentioned before, you'll see that for the school year at the bottom of the subsidy comparison report, the total increase in the budget, including adult ed, is $352,746, and so the total increase in funding again is $648,193. I've already talked a little bit about the revenues, and now I'd like to move into what the variables are for our budget. A couple of things I wanted to point out is in this particular budget, there's only there's relatively few increases outside of salaries and benefits, which those are negotiated. We don't have any contracts that are up this year, so there's no flexibility with that. All of our local agreements and collective bargaining agreements have all been approved for next year. The Gartley Street School, on those pages you'll see, are a huge increase, or looks like a huge increase. Main PERS is the Maine State Retirement, and a few years ago the state started to transition the Maine State Retirement costs onto the school districts. The total amount that's included in this particular budget that you have to raise locally for that is $359,052, and that's something that's new over the last, I think, 3 years. The increase this year we anticipate is around $66,489, so that's an increase, main PERS, and that's a variable as well. And then, of course, salaries and benefits. As I mentioned before, the debt service, one of the things that came up during our informational nights when we were moving forward with the gymnasium proposal was people were asking, well, what do you do? I know that the interest comes off this debt. What do you do with those funds? And so I've tried to make a point to explain to the community every single year what we do with that reduction. And this year, in the debt service, we anticipate our records show that there's going to be a decrease of $39,773 in interest. And so what we did is we took $28,946 of that amount and moved it towards the bus leases to make those a wash. And then we took last year we cut $10,000 from our technology fund and some other areas. And what we said is we were going to use that interest to try to build those back. And so because technology is one of the goals, we added the $10,000 back into technology. So the actual reduction in debt service only shows to be is documented at $1,927. Some of the variables that are here that we're going to have to address over the next few months. The first two are adult education and pre-K. Adult education, one of the things, because of the changes in our numbers and number of students who are actually enrolled and the number of programs that we've actually had community members enroll in, those have decreased significantly. We believe that the student numbers have decreased as a result of the alternative program that we have at Gartley Street School. And so the numbers, the state has come in and looked at, you're supposed to provide 3 programs in order to receive subsidy. They base it on our actual costs, and because instead of paying for a full-time director and secretary, we have a stipend position for that particular job. As a result, we're only going to be eligible for a percentage of what we're spending. And so the adult education budget has decreased significantly by over $100,000 and $765. So adult education is a variable that we're trying to consolidate with RSU4, but again, the state is hesitant to do that, and they may at some point just tell us that they're not going to subsidize any of our programming, and so then the school committee would then have to make a decision: is it going to be worth our while to keep it going? One of the other pieces is that a lot of times the rec department and adult education have been competing with one another for different programs, and so the numbers have decreased as interest has gone that way as well. So that's a variable. The other piece is the pre-K. This year, as of July 1st, 2017, all pre-K, including the existing programs, have to be approved by the state. Our application is due on March 30th. I just saw that they're at the first draft today, or it was sent to me. Haven't reviewed it yet. I don't believe that we're going to have any issues, but again, that's something that's out there. Until that program is approved, I don't want to plan, because if the program isn't approved, that impacts our budget, impacts our subsidy, but it also impacts what our costs would be. So we're hoping that that's just a formality. But the application is pretty extensive, and there's a lot of requirements that we have to meet in order to have it approved. So at this point, our pre-K program is in the process of being approved. Bond proceeds I already talked about. Those probably are no longer an option, so we can disregard those. Capital reserve, that's something that we've used over the years. The amount that we used this year and last year is $20,081. That amount is actually used towards the guaranteed performance contract, which the costs are obviously more than that. And we do have, I think, around $40-something thousand currently in the capital reserve. So we could technically, that's a variable, because we could always increase that amount and use those funds to help offset the budget. The Gartley Street School revenue, that's a variable, because, like I said, if we were to receive 3 out-of-district students attend, our conversations would change significantly, because it would the revenue would definitely match what we budgeted versus what we anticipated. So there could be an increase there. Our health insurance is currently budgeted at 9%. Last year is the only year that we ever had it come in that high. We budgeted at 9%, and it came in at 8-point-something%. So that's something, and I know historically, every percentage of insurance that is below, or every 1%, is usually in the $18 to $20-something thousand range, depending on who we have, what we have for people taking insurance. So that's a variable that's out there. The main PERS, that increase, is something that I know that the legislators are having lots of conversations about, transitioning that amount over to property taxes. And so that amount through the state aid could change as we move forward. But again, this is based on the preliminary figures that we received in February. Resignations, and I mention that because at times we can do some restructuring or through attrition. We don't fill positions. I don't have any any thoughts or ideas of what that would look like right now. We have talked about restructuring, but what that would mean is we would take the money from one position and switch it into another position if it was whether it was a teaching position, put it into a special ed position or whatever, but the bottom line is usually a wash. And sometimes with resignations, I know the retirements, those announcements are supposed to be in to me before March 1st. And I know some people believe that if people who have that many years experience retire, that there should be savings. But a lot of times those people only take single or two-person insurance, whereas people coming in usually take the full family. And so that generally will offset a lot of the savings. There's not as much there as somebody would think. Special education, I think we're in a good shape. You'll see that on the cost centers that there's a decrease in special education, but that is directly related to the fact of that we've established the Gartley Street program. But special education, you could have students move into the district. A student needing some type, like say a medical type of treatment, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that happens. In the past, it was usually out of district. Now we have the facilities to handle that, but in the past, you're talking $50,000 to $75,000 roughly for some students to be placed out of district. But we have that reserve, or we have that capacity now. But again, special education is always a variable, and it's a cost that doesn't seem to be getting any cheaper. State subsidy, what I've been told is that there's a lot of conversations going on. I don't know how much agreement's going on up in Augusta, but they're talking about not having a state budget until June, and that would be obviously after we go to referendum. We did receive language from Maine School Management that would basically allow you to consider that any additional funds that we may receive as a result of any changes to the funding formula, we would be able to utilize for the following year's budget or this year's or the following year's budget without having to go out to referendum. So that's something we're going to we just got the email yesterday, so Twyla and Haley were just talking about that earlier this evening, so we'll have that conversation as we move forward. Unanticipated revenue, that could be, again, that's probably going to be consumed by the Gartley Street School revenue, but it is, sometimes you can get tuition. We haven't received a lot, but there are times when we find that the state does have property of ours that we can contact them. It takes forever to get a check, but we've received checks as little as $5 or $10 or $20, and received some for a couple hundred. So those are all unanticipated revenue, and then any rebates and stuff we get for any of the work we do is another, and any of the sales of any of the equipment that we have is counted as that as well. And the unassigned fund balance, as I mentioned before, that is a variable that we could use. We currently have the auditors are mentioning to have a 3%. We have more than that in there. I'm guessing we have a couple $100,000, but the only challenge is that you want to be careful if you use all of it at once. You have to make sure that there's that amount in there the following year. Otherwise, you're just prolonging the inevitable that at some point you're going to have to raise those funds or make additional cuts. So we would have that conversation as we move forward with this particular budget with the school committee, and then we'd be proposing any changes to you. But I use the numbers that we currently had to propose this budget. Over the next few months, I'm sure, as always, you will receive questions from the community, receive questions amongst yourselves. I hope that you feel confident enough that if you do have a question about the school budget, you can email me. Generally, I have email hooked to my phone, so I usually give you a response. If you don't hear from me within 12 hours or so, then I may or may not have received it. But you can call me as well and set up an appointment. I know some of you have come in and talked to me about different things. So you will be approached as we move forward. And if you have questions, sometimes it's easier for me to be able to talk to you and answer it than to have people assume that they may or may not know. And these numbers change so much. They've changed so much since February. They're going to change again. And we're just hoping to be able to have some things fall in our favor and move forward with a budget that we can present to the community that obviously is fiscally responsible and it maintains the programs and services that we currently have. Any questions? That concludes my presentation on numbers, but does anybody have any questions that they want to?
3%.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. You hit it.
I'm going to defer. Go ahead.
3% of fund balance, or undesignated fund balance, is that of your total budget of the 15,000,006?
Yeah, I don't have the
that
email.
the
I
way
believe
that
that's what he
works?
said. 3 million. It comes out to or he said 300, around 300 something thousand, maybe 400. Do you remember that? It was 300 something thousand. But again, he didn't have his notes in front of him. He probably doesn't want me saying that publicly. But
No,
that's
that's fine. So I was just trying to figure out where that 300,000 came from.
it was from past. It's what we've rolled over the years. We've only
no,
used,
I know.
Okay.
Quite literally, mathematically.
Oh, what the number?
Yeah, I mean, I do 3% of the 15,000,006, and I don't come up anywhere near the 300,000. That's why I was trying to come up with that number.
Yeah, I only have the email from the, and he didn't have his notes in front of him, so he
That's
couldn't-
fine. That's fine. I don't want to.
Yep.
That's the reason I asked was I know the fund balance policy that we just put in play. We have to consider ours is 12% of budget, which includes county in the local portion from your budget as well too. So what I was kind of driving at is, isn't that double counting it? Am I off on that, Lydia?
Depends on if you're looking at it from the school versus the town side. I wouldn't consider it double counting it because he's not considering, if you want 3%, I'm assuming is what the auditors are saying of the total budget.
Mhm.
That's to ensure that you have enough cash flow to pay your current obligations. It's really not so much a matter of what the town is owed to you. So
Okay.
he's
Okay,
recommending
okay.
for
I follow, because the assumption is they're gonna get it from the revenue stream from the local allocation. Okay, okay. I just wanted to make sure it was an apples to apples. That's why I was asking. Go for it. You had a question?
Yeah, mine was just, I want to rewind a little bit, go back to talk about ed techs, special ed techs versus, and I'm going to use my term because that's what I wrote down here, mainstream, if you will. And so you had kind of said that there's specifically, you have to have the special ed ed techs, and I say have to because I'm assuming that a lot of those students have IEPs that are
IEPs, yeah.
required, and so therefore you're bound by state law to then go ahead and meet those obligations. So therefore, if you have students with those needs and that require one-on-one ed techs, then you have to fill that.
Correct.
need.
Yep.
Okay.
We're required by law to have anything that's in the IEP for coverage, and an IEP is an individualized educational plan for students.
Right.
And it will say in there that they need to have supervision or support instruction or even direct instruction, and so we have to hire Ed Tech 1, or actually 2s and 3s are the ones that can do that.
I didn't really want to get down in the weeds on that, but I just think it's important since you talked about it. It was
Yep.
important to kind of clarify it so that the folks at home can understand what we're talking about when we're talking about that.
And some of those are paid for. In the past, people have talked about like the local entitlement. We do get funds through local entitlement, which is federal money that we receive for special education. So some of those ed techs are paid for through that. But most of the ed techs and stuff are in the special education budget.
And just speaking of the special education budget, we had Mr. Merrifield present to us the other night, and over the past couple of years, a lot of the special ed directors get together to talk about kind of what trends and numbers are. And last year we had kind of what they call a big bubble of students that had entered into the district, and everyone kind of was seeing that. Well, the new conversation is that these numbers are going to start to be kind of the norm So he is estimating, at least from what he has been told from Child Development Services, of students coming into our district, meaning kindergarten age children, that we're looking at upwards of 25 that will be coming in. 20 of them have been identified with IEPs. 5 are currently out of district placements, but we believe that 4 of them will be a good fit, and he's out doing evaluations to come into our program. 1 will still remain in out of district. So,
Thank you.
Long story short, he's actively trying to keep the cost in-house, so we're not paying to put somebody on a bus and incur additional cost. It was pretty troubling when he's, at this point, already worked to slot all of 2 students, and he already knows what he's looking at potentially for next year to reset that calendar and begin that process over again, if I was hearing him correctly. One of the other statistics that you put out there in the first meeting, Rick, percentage of your total budget that's salaries and benefits, just for the soundbite.
I haven't physically calculated that, but I know it's around 70%. I believe it's around 70%. 68 to 70% of our budget is salaries and benefits. That's what it's been in the past. I'd have
Right.
to look. Yeah, we haven't cut, but that's traditionally what it's been.
That's a good one just to hear from the general population's perspective, because basically, to your first point, first slide, is your budget that you put out here now is no cut to the actual current programs that are in play now. If 70% of the budget is actually salary and benefits, if you're looking to make any sizable cut, if the numbers that are in this budget are solid, you're going after a reduction in programming somewhere.
Programs and services, yeah. That's usually where we have to look, because it doesn't come from.
The other 30% of
it
your
doesn't come
entire
from the-
budget,
Yep.
knowing that that 30% includes debt service and other items that you're contractually obligated to pay as well. So,
The preliminary ED 279 of like 115,000 less, and that was directly related
And
to
last year, yep.
yeah, our administrative costs. So
That's what
that-
I believe it's, that's what I believe is
I realize,
attributed to
yeah,
it.
exactly. So with that being a preliminary number, the reality is, as this thing works its way through Augusta, it may come out that that number could be then lowered, so we'll get a little bit more.
Yeah, I believe that is the governor's proposal, because there's a lot of pieces in there that are good for schools, but then the administrative piece is a challenge for schools, because it's trying to, force consolidation. And I do want to be on record that we have approached a lot of schools, and the LRTC, I've talked to the school committee about all the different options we've looked at. One of the things that I found in the past has been it's a lot easier for us to work with the town. And up until 2 years ago, we had different positions that were shared between the town and the school. The issue is that the recent grants or the additional funds that the state was offering to schools to consolidate, they changed it after they first came out and said you could work with a municipality, and then they changed it and said that you're going to get a weighted score if you work with a regional school unit. And between collective bargaining agreements, schedules, and distance, it's not easy to work necessarily even where we are with other systems. It's a lot easier to work with the municipality, obviously. But yes, that's,
So, I mean, ultimately.
I believe this is the worst case scenario.
Right. So let's just say we get to the end game, and best possible case scenario is it's a wash, and we get so we get exactly what we got last year. There's still going to be just to maintain, and that's my takeaway from the slides is there, to maintain our current level of service. We're still talking about an increase of roughly a little more than 550,000 if I back that 115 out
Right.
of that. So,
Currently.
Yeah. Okay.
And I believe it will change, because although we lost money, we lost 100-something thousand, some of the big districts lost millions.
Yeah.
And they have the political position and power, and that's what everybody's saying now is those districts are kicking and screaming. And there's some districts of, same size or even larger that received millions, but the big districts If you, I don't have the list in front of me, but I believe Portland lost like over $1 million or $2 million or something like that. So they have a lot of legislation. They have the legislators' ears, and everybody's anticipating that they're going to kick and scream. And next thing, this will change a little bit. But there are still a lot of good things in here. They took out we used to have our Title I monies reduced from this budget in one of the proposals. So it's it's a mixture of kind of give and take. And so there's a lot of systems that most of the people I've talked to, I don't hear a lot of grumbling about it because everybody either maintained or gained a little bit of money. We lost some money, but we've lost more in the past. And like I said, the big districts lost money, and we believe some of the big districts lost money. I know Auburn. I'm pretty sure Auburn did. Portland did. So they're going to start having those conversations. But again, I believe this is the worst case scenario. And the numbers that we have, regardless of what happens, we would not present anything more. If anything, our goal is to get it less, because this is a couple $100,000 more than anything I've ever had approved, or at least brought to the council for final approval. This is the beginning stages. We have 2.5 months. There's a lot of things that are going to happen.
Right.
And to be honest, I believe this is about 160 something thousand less than what we presented last year at the initial state.
600 of which is the Gartley Street program.
Correct. The big portion of that, is Gartley, but I don't think it's all. I don't think the whole increase is 600. I think it's more around 250, 300, because we had certain positions that we didn't fill.
Right.
And that's
right.
why you
it was
shift.
Shift to
On
allocate.
paper, if you look
Yeah.
at, if you go to page 41 or whatever,
You're going to
looks
see
like
it. You're going to see it there, but
I
it's a
think it's,
shift from elsewhere in the budget. Right.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like it's 800 and something thousand, but it's really not.
One of the other things I wanted to just touch base on was the adult education piece of it. Since we do have the alternative ed piece for our students at the high school, the need for recovery of what used to be known as the GED program, which is now known as the HiSET. I believe we're capturing those students to stay in school and get their high school diplomas. So the need at the other end of it has decreased and that is why the current year the programming has been lowered for that reason, because we do believe we're doing a good job in that program to catch those students so that they're graduating with their high school diplomas instead of having to do the HiSET. So when you look at the funding piece, we'll have to wait to see what the state says, but they're, depending on what that report comes back at, it may be that, we just refer our, anyone looking for those additional services to go to a surrounding area where we're capturing what we feel, or I feel, is my target audience is to keep the kids in school and get their diplomas. So,
Is it too soon to tell, based on the graduation rate numbers, whether or not that's kind of bearing itself out? So you graduate.
our graduation rates have increased substantially since we started that program, which has
Okay.
been 4 years? 3 years,
No, it's been at least 4.
at least 4.
Just be interesting to see. I'm not saying, I just think that would be interesting to see if you looked at the adult ed and the use of the GED program up to that point, and then that transition point from
Well, I think part of it
starting point
too
to
is
now.
that when they switched over from relinquishing the GED program and changing it to the HiSET program, it's now computerized, so I don't know if that deters people a little bit further. But when they made that switch statewide, we noticed even then that when we were offering it full-time as service, that the numbers had started to creep down.
Thank you.
And to expand on that with adult education, the number of students, because I usually attend the ceremonies in the past, up until last year, we would probably have 8 or 10 students, and when I say students, the non-traditional students would come back, and I think the community is kind of those people who may have taken 15, 20 years out of high school, come back, get their degree. The numbers for those students are very low, and I think last year there might have been 3. Well, there's one that showed up to the graduation, but normally there's 10, and there's always there's more, 12 or 15, but only 10 show up in March and they do their celebration. Last year there's only 1 that showed up, and that's when it kind of became clear through the process that something was going on, And then we started looking at our numbers after both the director and the administrative secretary left. Started looking at the numbers and looking at the participation numbers, and they're very low. And then again, we're competing with for years they've been competing with the rec department, offering the same type of courses, and it's just,
Both are suffering
both are yeah.
because they're cannibalizing each other.
I think, and one thing that I'm not sure of is that we may still be able, through the Gartley Street School, offer the high-set testing. We just wouldn't receive any subsidy for it. So we could probably do that for a minimal cost, but still offer that for our residents. But again, I have to get the clarification, because the state, I think, is looking to make cuts, and so they're looking at this, well, you're not keeping the same type of programming, so unless you do these three things, we're not going to provide any subsidy.
Still cheaper than incurring additional costs and getting less of a subsidy anyways.
Correct.
So you're
Yep.
minimizing your cost out front. What else? You must have a half a dozen questions.
I mean, I'm curious if you went to the, say we go to the voters with this as our final budget instead of reducing it, what would be the mill rate impact of that? I'm just, trying to get
I wouldn't go to the voters
Yeah.
with this.
okay.
And I don't know the mill rate. It changes every year, and with the new valuation, I don't know. It's always been like 300,000 or 400,000 is 1 mil, and that equals so much per 100,000. The reporter asked me that. I don't know if she got a hold of you, but I told her I don't know if that's set.
I mean, it might be
That's
a
how
mill-
we've
mill
always,
and a-
in the past, you're right, that's how we've always figured out what the
Right,
impact is, but
yes, yeah,
the school committee would not
okay.
present this to you for final approval.
Okay.
What else?
So, I mean, the biggest cost drivers you'd say are the Gartley Street School is the biggest thing driving
Special
that increase.
education.
Yeah, special education.
Yeah, it's on page, what did I say, 41 through 43.
Okay.
About this.
And I mentioned, but I tried to be upfront with everyone that was never budgeted correctly. It happened at the last minute, and it just seemed like a great idea, and it is a great idea. But the revenue piece, that they don't. You have to get billing units. I mean, Diane and I were talking. You have to be approved for billing units, and then you only get so many. And after you get that, then you have to be reapproved again. And some of the staff that we hired weren't Ed Tech 3s; they were 2s. And so you got to have 3s to bill. We thought you could have 2s. So it's been a learning experience for everyone, but we're now starting to generate the revenue that we feel we'll get for next year, and then be a lot closer to actuals. But again, I went from 139, which I thought I was being relatively conservative, but in the end, we're guessing it'll be around 79,000 for the year next year, and it'll be hopefully more, but that's the problem when you try to budget and you use revenue and it doesn't come in.
One of the things they talked about at their meeting when they had that discussion, you could easily make it the 140 or twice that if you added additional staffing. They talked about a social worker position available, but the position that's actually presented here is the conservative number.
Mhm.
That figure can go up, but there's a cost associated
Right.
with their overhead
Mhm.
accordingly.
I heard something when you just spoke now, I just want to clarify for myself. So you thought you could use Ed Tech 2s for billing, but ended up you had to use 3s. So
Yep.
in essence, there was work done that could have been billable work, but because we used
Yep.
2s, we didn't get to bill out for that, and that was just part of a learning curve.
It was, and then we also believe if we add additional social work services down there, you can bill out for social work services, and we currently have a psychological
Right.
service provider. We only have one, but we believe that you can bill out, and then that frees up the other social worker to do more. It's, I hate to look at it that way, but it is something that you have to try to sustain and supplement the program. But it's just little things like that when you put it together, it happened. It had to happen, and it happened, as you know, real quick.
Right, no, exactly.
At the same time, you're doing bathroom and electrical upgrades.
Right? Yeah, we were down there. Doing,
You
yeah,
were
we
doing
built-
all of
was-
it at once.
The paint was
Right.
still fresh the first day the kids came in, so
Realizing it was moving pretty quickly. It's not unusual to have those sorts of hiccups, where best laid plans, you're still going to have these sort of growing pains. But at least if we can recognize them early on in the program, so we can prepare for them next time around, and hopefully realize that revenue like you speak about. So.
and I think, well, it wasn't mentioned tonight, but at the school committee meeting, the one student we did have out of district moved here. So, but I think in the end, we'll make out as
Gain
just
more
well,
to
because we'll
having
be able
them
to
in
count
the
them on our
enrollment.
April 1st account.
Right.
But to give you an example, what it was that district had to pay, because they didn't have transportation specialists like we do, they had to pay for a taxi cab to bring the student to school every day. So it was like it was $100 and something a day for travel, plus $250 a day for our tuition. That's one student. So it doesn't take long to add up when you have out of district placements.
How many did we bring back because of the Gartley School? Just to kind of to put that in perspective.
All but 3.
It wasn't 12 teachers from Westbrook actually helping him load the van to get him to move here, was it? Because I could see us doing it. Oh, wow.
Did you say that out loud, Alan?
Oh, we'll flip that right up here. No, it's good, and it's beneficial for the student, because now, in that regard, it's a resource that's actually here benefiting for somebody that's in the community. That's the piece that I would focus on in that regard, is I remember listening to the statistics last year. It was something like 56 students driving a $300,000 increase when you were looking at that, and it just, mathematically, it was nuts when you did that per student. It's incredible.
Yeah, if I believe that if you were to pay out of district just with the students we have now, not with the ones coming in, the numbers are over 900,000. So right now you're saving 100,000 a year by having the program.
Right.
With the potential of saving additional plus revenue. So that's what I'm saying. You can either pay for it now with the Garley Street program, or you're gonna
Right.
pay for it one way or the other. And
Right.
I know of one district that had to freeze their budget because their out of district costs were so high. They don't have a program, so they're paying to send kids, and they literally had to freeze their budget in the fall because they were overexpended because of out of district costs. And those are part of an IEP. So if a group of people determine that the school department can't provide those services, then you are legally obligated to pay for those.
Any other questions?
If I have one.
Good.
If this increase wasn't a possibility at all, and as I understand, the Gartley Street's a high priority for you guys,
Mm-hmm.
where would you find the funds if you couldn't get the increase to meet the amount that you'd like for Gartley Street? Where do you think you would look?
We would have to look at programs and services and what we'd prioritize, just like we always have. We have a list of different items. A lot of the stuff that that's on the outside of the budget that that impacts kids, but they're not like a service. SROs one. We cut an SRO last year as a result. The volunteer coordinator, just positions that are outside that don't directly or not in the classroom that would support students. So.
Right.
But as you know from past budgets, many of those positions have been eliminated. So at this point, it would be looking at the actual classrooms. We are out of many of the extras, as people like to call it. The
So we're
volunteer
down in-
coordinator.
It's a level of
Past
service.
the flesh, we're down into the bone now.
We are. We are.
Meaning,
Meaning that the arts would take a hit, sports would take a hit, extracurricular would take a hit, and then you would actually need to get down to finding out having only the very bare minimum and no enrichment type courses for student electives
Curriculum takes a hit.
for curriculum. Yep. And we don't have very many as it is.
Things
Just
things
the-
that encourage kids to go to
Always a
college.
little guy that gets kicked around,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
always.
But there are, I mean, as Mr. Green's presented in there, I mean, he's talked about the capital reserve account. He's presented 20. There's a little potential to be able to have that be twice that figure based on discussion. He's mentioned the undesignated fund balance. We're currently over in that based on their 3% figure at a 300,000.
Who's 3% figure?
The outside auditors.
The auditors.
Right.
Keep in mind, that is just a recommendation.
Right, and that was a key piece. But in that regard,
You did.
mathematically, it seems realistic. The point that I'd say, the fact is, if the figure that I heard of on $800,000 worth of undesignated, there's some leeway there. But to Mr. Green's point that he's made is the budget needs to come in realistic so you don't have a dip in that fund balance that now you go below that. So you can only use kind of the situation we had on our side 4 years ago. When you go below your undesignated, now you got to build it back up over time, and they have to get real specific on how they actually do that. So there is potential. What was the percentage on insurance again?
Insurance is 9%.
No.
Health
To go
insurance?
from 9 to 8 is how much again?
Between 18 and 20-something thousand. It changes
So
each year.
any on that, you can tick it down. They're
We had
hopeful.
0% 3 years ago. And then last year we had 8 point, whatever, 6.
So if you come in at 4 to 5% optimistically, then it's reasonable by the time May rolls around and you get a few changes in
Mhm.
people's benefit elections, there could be $100,000 right there. You know, so I like hearing we're under the $1 million that we were looking at when you guys sat here this time last year associated with that. So
I'm just trying to look at the bigger picture to all of this because there's a wave coming as someone actively working in the real estate market now, and have worked with buyers who have compared Lisbon homes with, say, Sabatis or Brunswick or any other home, and it's tough. Most of the time, they're not going to go with Lisbon. So as far as the bigger picture and where we could lead, I know it's hard to see now, but if this wave hits, I'm confident that it will, having our town be more appealing can help us in the long run and bring in and generate more revenue. So when I look at things like, okay, if art and these certain programs take a hit because we want to prioritize special ed, that's important. And I don't know exactly what the hit is going to be, but if that's kind of my thinking right now, is that if we can take a hit now, but we can help make our town more appealing for buyers in the future when this market hits, that's what I would like to see.
But I think on that same note, the stronger your school system is, the more appealing it's going to be for people to move here. And I know one of the issues with our budget is the fact that the town's valuation has increased.
Yeah, well, and at the
And so
same time,
that's-
it's, yeah, right, of course, better school, it's more appealing, but it's a budget. It's certain people who are going to try to get pre-qualified, and they'll bring I'll bring a certain property to their lender, and they'll say, taxes are too high. It's just not going to work. That's usually what kills it with certain Lisbon properties. So that's the hit, you know, and it depends. I mean,
okay, I was thankful for the clarification. 'Cause I was trying to figure out where you were going with that. So you're saying it's the basket of goods. In the day, it's the valuation for the tax liability. Is your new view? Okay.
it's tough. It's tough for us.
Oh, and then
to
it's
compete.
I look at what's going on at Kelly Park right now and the fact that whether it be the people that ultimately settle with those apartments or the 36 or 38 homes, if and when it comes, they're going to be in our community paying taxes as well too. Obviously, there's a cost that's going to be directly drawn to the level of service for police, fire, schools specifically, because we need to address that for something that you're going to perceive a better value for your alternatives locally. And if it's just, I mean, because one of the things that I look at the level of service, the outlining places that used to benefit from us, Durham, Green, and others, what's the level of service for living in those communities for the value? It's just not there. That I know that's my opinion, and I'm obviously slanted because we live here.
I'm going to use a really simple analogy it's something I think that really jumped out at me the other day. I was watching news coverage after the storm, the blizzard, and so they planted one of the newscasters right in our downtown, midtown plaza there, and it was funny because they gave a shot, and I can see Billy's Auto Shop, and I can see Rite Aid, and the weather girl keeps going back to the same thing over and over again. She's like, yeah, we just got done the blizzard. These roads are really clear, though. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, they are. And I was really happy and proud because our public works kicked some tail and it's, goes back to what you're thinking, Dale, which is taxes definitely drives anybody who's purchasing a new home, but two things that come to mind: the roads, and what their makeup are, and what their school district's like. And then certainly taxes is right there. So top three, how people prioritize those. But I thought about services, and it goes back to what you said, Alan. Some of our competing areas, like Durham and Sabatis, absolutely have low taxes. But if you compare what they get versus what we give, we're gonna have to pay for that.
Yeah,
Those
and
services.
they look at how certain schools are doing, and they
absolutely.
look at certain ratings, and when they look at Lisbon, it's not the most appealing. It's just the way it is. So
What are you comparing that on?
on the whole scale, I mean, when buyers look at certain reviews online or what
Because
people-
our high school, we're actually one of the top 5 or 6 high schools in the region. And we're actually, I mean, when you look at our numbers, I know you got to take it with a grain of salt, but Lisbon High School was ranked, or Lisbon School Department was ranked in the top 30 in the state.
on the whole
So I don't know and it goes by the graduation rates and classroom sizes and things like that. So I have just as much data to show that the school department is making progress. The problem is that if we keep cutting it, then we're going to have issues. But the student achievement rates have grown over the last 7 or 8 years, have grown significantly at the high school and at the other schools. If you're basing it on the report card now that's, 6 years old, and the fact that LCS was a failing school 6 years ago or 5 years ago, whatever it was, when they come out with a new report card, you'll see that the school department has made significant growth in all those areas. So I would say the data or whatever is just as strong that we are doing the right things, and the fact that we're one of probably the only high school in the entire state that's ever gone from being on probation to being fully accredited by doing it locally. Very few school systems or very few communities have committed that kind of money to their school departments and fixed their infrastructure locally without going out to waiting for the state building application and stuff like that. So this community has to be commended. They've made a huge commitment to the school department, and I believe people see that when they drive into town. They don't see a building that's falling apart anymore. They see a state-of-the-art facility, and we have people that are scheduling things to do here. And the academic piece, I've got the data to show. They just sent out a regional, Western Maine superintendents sent out a regional spreadsheet of all the schools, and Lisbon High School is right there. There's only, I think Mount Blue is ahead of us, but there's schools in the area very close to us that are on the very tail end of that. And I'll forward that to you so you can take a look at that.
I'm hearing that it's an education. I'm hopeful that what you're saying is actually gonna come through, and the fact is we're dealing with that, and the fact is we're having people settle in the area, and that we can actually address educating what we have here, because I think that's our goal. I believe you're right, and the fact is that there's a certain element, they don't give a damn. The fact is, they know their valuation of the property, they know their tax bill, and anything that's above that, is the level of service thing, I'm never gonna hit that.
It's hard. Yeah, that's a hard one to try to sell, and I can see where you're coming from. It's hard to tell
You're
somebody
selling
that.
to that every day, I get that,
I'd just like to see us compete. I think we can do better.
Yeah.
I think we have a great
No, and
town.
I'm not,
And that wave's gonna hit. It's gonna come. It already is. We're already growing.
Right.
So the more appealing we can be, I'm just trying to look down the road
Right.
and not just for municipal side, for you guys too. More revenue.
Fully occupied Main Street with businesses in Lisbon Falls. It's a nice place to start, and if we can get somebody to wander down that street once everybody's in place, new businesses as well, that's going to be a really nice little gem to kind of point to. That'll be a selling point for any person who wants to buy a home here, to go down there and kind of see what's happening there. And then if we can kind of duplicate that in other parts of this town, that'd be great too. But you're right. You're absolutely right. You're leading the charge on that. So who better to get the information from than somebody's doing it every day?
And Scott Kelly, an even
17
better
new homes.
explanation.
Right.
17 new homes built last year using Dennis's statistics in his meeting.
Mhm.
That, one of the, we talk about economic development sitting here associated with that. One of the things that we need to not lose sight of is the fact is, we're a bedroom community, 35 minutes in any direction from employment. The fact is, one of the things we're going to have is a certain level, is you're not gonna get a box store
Yeah.
every day of the week. You're gonna get the homes because people understand the fact is, in any direction that I go, I have level of service for employees. employment. Be able to, people are gonna travel, you do it every day. Drive to Portland, cause your dollar here is worth 30 cents more, and it's worth your time to be sitting in the car. You may not have seen it during that.
Well, no, I scream about it a lot all the time, and I think that, and poor Tracy hears it from me, I'm like, I want to land a whale, and I know that's unrealistic to get that type of employer into our community. But if we be competitive, as you mentioned, Dale, I think if we can be competitive, I think we have a lot of components that would make that very appealing because we're 30 minutes from everything. The same way that we go to these jobs, I want us to be a destination spot. If we land, excuse me, if we land a whale, whether it's in technologies or whatever it is, we're that much closer to those folks that, there are people driving from Portland to come up here too because
Yes.
as great as it is from a dollar perspective, that market's saturated. And eventually, it becomes about what kind of lifestyle do you want to lead. Do you want to be on 295 for what should be 35 minutes but ends up being an hour and 15 or an hour and 30 because the 2 lanes is snarled into one because of accidents? And that's a regular occurrence. That's not just a once a week. That's like 3 or 4 times every week. So I hope we get there. I really do.
You've been quiet, sir. You must have a question. I'm going right back over here in a second, too.
Go ahead, go right over there.
What are you thinking, Chris?
I'm thinking there's too many variables, there's too many assumptions, there's,
2 months to
this
go.
is 2.5 months. You guys can cut it up and talk about it all you want. As Rick has mentioned, there's so much in that's gonna change.
Right.
I mean, so you can what if it for the next 2.5 months.
Right.
Until he says, this is it. Wanna hear about it? Then,
Discussion's open, right?
right.
You're spoken like a man who's been there before.
Oh, this isn't the first one I sat with Rick, so.
How about you? Go for it, Mr. Crawford. You got a thought, I know you do.
I don't have a thought.
Nothing? All right,
Taking notes.
Taking it all in.
seeing nothing else, I'll take a motion.
Make that motion to
I'll
adjourn.
second.
All right, we're out of here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
14 minutes late. I didn't do bad.
I was a windbag today.
Yes.
Kept flapping my gums.
And Counselor Colby is excused?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay, just wanted to check.
I'm sorry.
In a minute, I wanna talk to you.
Let me run and vote with Counselor
Anybody else that wants to sit? that's it.
Recorder.
I got nowhere to be. I got nowhere to be. We would eventually.
Mike Stewart issued